Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are going to unpack something truly fascinating. We're embarking on a foundational investigation into the origins of modern art. If you've ever looked at a modern painting or some abstract sculpture and just thought, wait, how did we get from classical realistic portraits to, well, splashes of paint and everyday objects being called art, you're exactly in the right place. We're going to systematically break down the how and the why behind the birth of the modern art movement, and we're going to use the exact same rigorous tools that art historians use. It's this incredible story of rebellion, new technology, and literally seeing the world in a completely new way. So here's our highly organized roadmap for today. First up, thinking like art historians. Second, defining the modern era. Third, urban and technological shifts. Fourth, abstraction and the nocturne. And finally, number 5, Paul Cézanne's radical vision. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. Thinking like art historians. Before we can even tackle the modern era itself, we really need to introduce the foundational toolkit used to analyze art history. Now you might be wondering, how do historians actually establish the context of an event in human history when the artist is, well, long gone? Unlike a political event that kind of vanishes the second it happens, an artwork is a tangible, visible thing. It survives its own time. So how do we decode it centuries later?
To decode these surviving artifacts, art historians actually rely on 5 core historical inquiries. First up is chronology. Basically, how old is it? We use physical and documentary evidence to place a work on a timeline. Next is style. What is its style? Is it from a specific period, a region, or is it the artist's own personal flair? Then, subject. What's the story or iconography being depicted? We also have to look at attribution. Who actually made it? Sometimes we don't have a name, so experts have to rely on connoisseurship to attribute it to a specific hand. And finally, patronage. Who paid for it? Throughout history, the patron often dictated exactly how a piece would look. It's like the Roman Emperor Augustus demanding he always be shown as this young, perfect head of state, completely regardless of his actual age. Crazy, right?
And this explosion of personal style, it's an absolute hallmark of the modern era. Take Georgia O'Keeffe's Jack in the Pulpit No. 4 from 1930. She completely transforms the organic forms of a flower into this powerful, almost slow-motion abstract composition of lines and colors. Now contrast that with Ben Shon's The Passion of Sacco and Vanzetti, painted just a year later. This is a stinging, highly specific social commentary on the execution of 2 Italian anarchists, featuring these rigid figures and government officials. Even though these were created in the exact same time period and region, their personal styles and subjects couldn't be more different. This massive explosion of subjective, independent perspective is exactly what we're about to explore.
Section 2, defining the modern era. Now that we have our analytical toolkit ready to go, let's place this specific movement onto our historical timeline. Let's ask the most important question first, just to really ground ourselves. What exact time frame defines modern art? History is vast, so pinning down these specific chronological boundaries is absolutely essential.
See, modern art isn't just any painting made recently. It's a very specific historical epoch bounded by hard dates. It kicks off around 1850, when the arrival of realism through artists like Gustave Courbet totally scandalized the art world. They started painting regular, unidealized peasants instead of classical myths. Then it gains incredible momentum with the first Impressionist exhibition in 1874. From there, it spans a century of just wild innovation until the late 1960s, before transitioning and officially ending around 1970, which is when the movement gives way to what we now classify as contemporary and postmodern art.
I absolutely love this quote from the famous abstract expressionist painter Jackson Pollock. He basically hit the nail on the head, stating that modern art is an expression of the age that we're living in, just like the airplane, the atom bomb, and the radio. That perfectly captures the visceral, human drive behind this whole movement. It wasn't just about mixing up paint techniques. It was about the fact that humanity was living through unprecedented, explosive change. The art literally had to reflect that new reality. Section 3, urban and technological shifts. Let's see how all this builds into the physical world, radically changing around these artists. To truly understand the art, we have to ask what happened to Europe's major cities between 1800 and 1900. What was happening politically, culturally, and technologically? Because honestly, the 19th century was a massive shock to the human system. The 19th century saw massive migration and rapid industrialization that completely altered the pace of everyday life. Think about it. Before the 1850s, life was mostly rural farms, manual labor, and relying on natural daylight. But post-1850s, everything flipped. We see a massive migration of people from the countryside into these huge, expanding urban metropolises. Machine-powered factories completely replaced manual labor. We got the internal combustion engine and electrical power generation. Suddenly, the world was loud, it was fast, it was brightly lit at night, and it was crowded. Artists woke up in this totally new, bustling visual landscape, and they desperately needed a new visual language to capture it.
And there was another massive technological shift right around this time, the invention of the camera. Classical art had always strived for idealized subject matter and perfectly accurate objective representation. But if a photograph can instantly capture perfect realistic detail in a fraction of a second, what on earth is the painter's job? Modern artists had to pivot entirely to subjective expression just to stay relevant. So, modern art became the answer. It shifted away from objective reality and instead focused on subjective perspective, recording the visual sensation, the feeling, and the artist's unique internal experience of modern life.
Section 4. Abstraction and the Nocturne. Next up, we're going to explore how this pivot away from strict realism births completely new artistic concepts.
You might come across this specific term in art history and wonder, what exactly is a nocturne, and how does it fit into this big shift toward abstraction? I mean, it sounds more like a piece of music, right?
Well, an artistic nocturne is an atmospheric, non-representational painting emphasizing visual sensation rather than a naturalistic depiction. Essentially, it captures a feeling or an impression of a scene, like fireworks bursting at night, rather than detailing its exact, precise mechanics. When artist James McNeill Whistler pioneered this in the 1870s, he famously painted a night sky illuminated by fireworks using these large splatters and small flecks of paint. It wasn't a blueprint of a rocket, it was the atmosphere, the shock of light in the dark. This was a massive, massive leap toward pure abstraction.
And this departure from traditional subject matter allowed artists to focus purely on the action, reaction, and perception of color itself. Just consider Josef Albers' homage to the Square series. It doesn't depict a person, a landscape, or an object. The subject of this painting is the color. Albers spent his career illustrating the subjective instability of color perception, proving that a color actually changes in our minds depending on the colors placed right next to it. By stripping away all that traditional narrative, Albers literally forces us, the viewers, to engage directly with the physical and psychological effects of the art.
Now, to make these massive leaps, artists had to be incredibly brave. And this brings us to the term avant-garde. Originally, this was a French military term for the frontline troops going into battle. But in art, it describes the vanguard of independently minded artists who sought to advance practices and continually challenge acceptable artistic form. These radical thinkers pushed the boundaries of what the rigid, state-run academies considered acceptable. They endured rejection, harsh criticism, and literal scandal to continuously invent the future of visual expression.
Section 5. Paul Cézanne's radical vision. Let's look at a specific foundational figure who perfectly embodied these avant-garde principles. So why is Paul Cézanne considered a foundational pioneer of modern art? What exactly did he do with his canvas that changed the trajectory of art forever? Let's break it down.
Basically, Cézanne stopped trying to blindly imitate nature. In his masterpiece, The Large Bathers, painted between 1898 and 1906, he arranged human figures under trees as if they were objects in a still life. He wasn't interested in recording visual observation to make a perfect photographic illusion. Instead, he focused entirely on how forms occupied space. He constructed scenes as if he were carving a physical sculpture with his paintbrush. This was an absolute breakthrough. By intentionally destroying regular illusionism, his work acted as a crucial precursor to Cubism and directly paved the way for artists like Pablo Picasso.
We can really wrap up this historical context by looking at the words of the great muralist Diego Rivera, who called modern art a means of social struggle. And he was spot on. This entire era, from Courbet's unidealized peasants to abstract squares of color, was a deliberate, challenging reaction to the status quo. It was a fight against old traditions in a newly industrialized, rapidly shifting world.
So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. If modern artists reinvented how we see the world in response to the camera and the factory, how will today's technology redefine the art of tomorrow? With the rise of artificial intelligence, digital reality, and unprecedented global connection, what will the next avant-garde look like?
Thank you so much for exploring this foundational explainer with me today. Keep looking closely at the world around you and never, ever stop questioning.